And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Just getting things just right here tonight for a quick update on election 2020. It's great to have everyone here with us. Now, today was pretty significant in some ways, and the media is trying to sort of hype up the other ways. But let's start with the kind of big announcement, which happened first, and that was that William Barr is to depart as Attorney General. This is all very significant for a couple of reasons, because one of them is that Barr was in a very unusual position with President Trump in that he had kept some of the Biden dealings and the investigations into Hunter Biden a secret during the election. And you could almost see that as playing kind of, defense there for the Biden team. And we have to look at the very unusual history around Barr. So now that he's out as Attorney General, which in and of itself is kind of strange if you think about it, because one of the odd things going on there is that Barr would ordinarily, if this was Trump's sort of last stand, he would be on his way out January 20th anyway. So how is it you leave just about a month in advance for no particular reason? That doesn't usually happen. But there's been a series of firings that have been going on here in relation to this administration, from the Defense Secretary Mark Esper to the big shakeups that he's been doing at the Defense Department. And of course, we've been covering the activation of the JFK NSAM 57. That's the National Security Action Memorandum that strikes the power of the CIA down and returns it all to the Defense Department, which is what Kennedy wanted to do in 1961. Didn't get to do it, and planned to do it after he was reelected in 64, never made it. Somehow, in the midst of Ezra Cohen Watnick, who's the Undersecretary of Defense Intelligence, and the acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, came about this little idea with Trump to activate this National Security Action Memorandum that had been on the books. Now, the interesting thing about the announcement, which now has been all over mainstream media, we called it here on November 20th, and one of the interesting things I think about it that's important and noteworthy is that they say now that the Pentagon will completely relinquish support for covert actions by the Central Intelligence Agency starting on January 5th. Now, this is a very important date because when you think about the January 6th Senate read-in of the votes that took place around the Electoral College, this gets pretty wild and topsy-turvy. Now, one of the things that isn't very well known from today, because the media has just been running around screaming, Biden got enough electoral votes. Well, not exactly. I'll tell you why the story is a little bit richer than all that. First of all, we have this headline: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona Republican electors cast votes for Trump. You know what that means? If you go into the Constitution, you have to come up with a slate of electors from each state. Now, if there's a dispute, you get two sets of electors, and they have kind of a runoff when the Senate read-in happens on January 6th. That's the nature of the situation now. We've been running something here called a True Map, which showed that neither candidate actually has 270 electoral votes, which would naturally take the election into the House of Representatives, where currently Trump has about a 4 or 5 point advantage, depending on how you look at it, because each state that votes in that scenario where the Electoral College gets decided in the House, each state gets one vote, and that's it. There's no averaging. It's not like 3 senators from one state or anything like that. You get one vote per state, and Trump had the advantage there. Now, as we kind of start the show tonight with this update, there have been other announcements around this. Let's see if I have one handy. It's known that a couple of other states are joining that too. One of the states that wanted to join it, which is quite interesting, was Michigan. But Michigan got pushed back, interestingly enough, because what happened with Michigan was that the second slate of electors showed up, and the state police greeted them because Governor Gretchen Whitmer had seen this coming, and she decided, even though these are duly elected representatives and legislature for the state of Michigan, she booted them out. And she said, you know, we're going to keep our little 16 people that we've appointed, and that's it. Now, of course, that's pure Stasi Nazi-style tactic because, you know, think about it. These are duly elected representatives of the people. You can't keep them out of the people's house, which is the Capitol. And to use the state police to do it on behalf of a governor, that is calling executive authority for authoritarian, totalitarian purposes. That's completely unconstitutional by any stretch of the imagination. All the people who showed up, you know, they're acting like some mad mob showed up or something. These were just constitutional representatives who were going in there to do their version of their duty. Their constitutional duty was to elect this slate for Trump. So in Michigan, that's a really big deal that they pulled that, and it shows the levels to which they're thinking in relation to the public. The public is just something to be gotten out of the way, you know, get on with it. We want to plug in techno transhumanist Biden. Now, it's an interesting thing about Biden as well, which is he's supposed to make a big address to the nation tonight, you know, but he hasn't been out there doing anything. And I think it's because the less exposure, the better, because this guy doesn't really get through many of these occasions too well, as we've seen, because there are cognitive issues with Biden. This is what they're holding back and what they'll eventually pull out the Trump card of Kamala Harris. So you can see this is a very disturbing situation, but regardless of how we would feel about that, the fundamental issue is that there's lots and lots of examples of voter fraud and lots of examples of legal protocol being violated, regardless of where you fall down on the election front, whether you wanted to go for Trump or Libertarian or for Biden. It doesn't matter. You know, if somebody was in there voting for Bernie Sanders, you want every vote to be counted properly. And it's not like we haven't had issues before with elections. But let's face it, the extremity of this one, especially when it came to stopping the election and stopping the vote counting, and then all the vote totals changed, it's very suspect, and anyone who would get in there with any kind of legal prowess would just overturn the entire situation. Now, what Trump has on his side is the work of Sidney Powell, who is a very, a very canny player in all this, and she's seen a lot of it, and she's overturned over 70 of the most important cases at a federal or Supreme Court level. This is not someone who is a lightweight by any stretch of the imagination, and the mainstream media is, kind of glomming onto her as a conspiracy figure. It doesn't hold up. That's really out of fear that they do that, because this is somebody who can really investigate and bring, she knows a lot of the connections. A lot of the busts that she's done over there are international drug trafficking. Think about that in relation to the election. So we're going to get into this a little bit tonight. We'll just do about a half hour here as we come along. We have Groovy Bean out there running the ship, doing a great job, and it's great to see her out there doing this. Some great people in the ideas room tonight. I want to remind everyone to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter. And really, when we're seeing people just getting thrown off of social media left and right, and certainly this is a big part of what I try to bring up in the State of the Union on Friday on this channel, which is the YouTube's positions are absurd. They don't even make sense for, their whole thing about hate speech, because now it's just, you can't question an election. So that's basically like, anytime we don't want you to do something, we're just going to put up a thing that says, if you do it again, we're taking you off our platform. So that's a way to reduce the conversation, and of course works against them in the end. But they decided that they needed to go for that, as opposed to show up at Davos this coming year and have their masters disapprove of their actions. So they're doing this, but the public is jumping off and joining all kinds of platforms like BitChute or Odyssey. And this is a great thing that we're seeing happening. Of course, you can reach so many people through YouTube, and we're going to continue to try. But we know that the way that they're handling everything, that the type of work that we're doing, trying to bring you the truth on the election, on this COVID disaster, and the propaganda around the virus, and trying to strip all of our constitutional rights in America, but also worldwide, just stripping human rights left and right. No wonder they want you to shut up about it, because they're in the middle of a crime and they don't want to be interrupted. So, but yes, it's important to go and make sure that you're signed up for the newsletter. That gives us a direct pipeline in case they get a little funny with the social media here. Okay, so what does it mean if Trump, and I got this question a few times today just on Twitter and places like that, what happens in the event that Trump has electors from Nevada? For example, he has 6 electoral votes from Nevada, but also Biden has a slate of electors for 6. Well, Nevada doesn't have 12 electors. So something there, you have 2 sides, which means if you get to a case in the Supreme Court, or if you get to a case that exposes this, that Trump has his electors ready to go. And this is the important thing. You can't say that either candidate at this point has the electoral votes that he needs, because if you do the math and you're a real investigative reporter, you'll have to say that you could be looking at disputes in all of those states that have come under question, whether it's Wisconsin or Georgia, Pennsylvania. This kind of coronation of the Electoral College, fraud is really the way you would look at it, because they're not going deeply and investigating it. And they won't take the cases. This is the thing, which is a surefire sign that there's something going on here. Now, one of the things I think when you look at this from a couple of different angles, Pennsylvania, for example, is 20 electoral votes. Georgia, 16. Arizona, 11. Nevada, 6. That's 53 electoral votes. They're trying to award Biden 306. Actually, if you take 53 off 306, you get 253. If you add 53 to what they're trying to give Trump, 232, you get 285. So you can see that the totals there are shifting, because now you have 2 slates of electors. Now, that's not something that was anticipated or reported upon by the mainstream media, even when it was happening. All the updates from the New York Times, which I'll watch all of those different outlets closely, they'll all say, well, in fact, Biden won today. It's so great. This should really nail it. Now Trump really is under pressure from the Republicans to get out, just stop all of this stuff. Well, if you were in a case and you thought you had sufficient evidence of voter fraud, you'd press the case forward and you would be celebrated in a constitutional republic. They would want you to do that. If this were a case, can you imagine the reverse of what happened today, for example, with that slate of electors going into the Michigan State House and getting blocked by police? Now, if they were Democrats representing the minority community there in Michigan, this would be, the media would be there and they'd cause World War III over this. So they're doing kind of reverse discrimination, and they're also sort of weighing their position and saying, when it comes to these people, it doesn't matter their constitutional rights. But when we can make points over here and get a story going and pretend we're all virtuous, well, then that's a different story. Then we're going to pull it out. We've seen that over and over again. Now, what I'd like to point out in relation to some of the things that took place today is basically what happens is you're looking here at December 14th. January 6th is when they go through the moves, and through the Senate, they announce the different electoral votes and the slates, etc. Now, in times past, including Elizabeth Warren and other people, Maxine Waters did it in 2016, there are challenges to that process that takes place. If you have a major case of voter fraud, such as the Dominion voter, Dominion voter fraud may be one of the biggest stories of the 21st century, period. It's a story that we're only just getting into. And the weird thing is, of course, some of these, like CNN and MSNBC, and that brand of coverage, they were really watching closely the Dominion machines, and they were saying, this stuff could be easily flipped and tampered with. And, this is as far back as 2007, 2008. So we have to keep that in mind as we go forward here, because they, the news media now is just a front for narratives. There's no reporting left. It's just, we have a narrative, we're going to force it down your throat. And if you don't accept it, we're going to try to throw you off social media or do other things to make you persona non grata. That's just their plan. They think they can bully and intimidate an entire world because they have some software. Basically, that's it. But it's tremendously dangerous in any case, and there are tremendous forces behind it. But on its face, what it is just the most outright in-your-face censorship that you've ever seen in your life, and accompanied by a whole lot of social bullying, which over and over again they decry. So, we're in an unusual situation where we're looking at a major crack in the system, in our system, and I'm going to work this out from America, from the American angle, but this is worldwide. I mean, we've seen tremendous media abuses and abuses of authority in places like Australia, for example. The UK, we're seeing a lot of pushback against that now. People are not going to be held in like this. The idea that you can kind of put freedom back in the bottle and just forget 1776 ever happened, again, just because you have the technology gives you an incredible edge, but it's not the total edge, because you still need people to accede to it. And if they don't, then you're really in a world of trouble, because you've set up this whole model based on it. So the best way to make them do that is to pretend that you're helping them, and that's where we get, the overblown statistics around the medical crisis, which over and over again they won't provide the real statistics on this, and they continue to inflate the statistics around the COVID situation to such a degree that really makes you start to wonder about how long they've had this in development. And there's a number of people now questioning. Naomi Wolf, for example, is doing a great job questioning the numbers. The New York Times reports something about this. They say, oh, the numbers have gone up 5,000, whatever. She says, where are you getting the data? And they never have any answers. Then we have the CDC now saying, well, we're going to conflate now pneumonia and flu deaths into this death total and keep giving you this rising total over and over again. And the truth is, they're like, well, there is no flu anymore, because they're adding those numbers in. And we've seen over and over again where they are playing up the numbers, so if somebody falls off a ladder or gets in an auto accident or something like that, there's the whole position of from versus with. What did you die from and what did you die with? And some of the people may have died from other causes completely, and they distorted the numbers because they died with the coronavirus, and then they checked off the box, boom, that's a coronavirus death. Well, those types of fraudulent numbers are a great danger in trying to sort out a situation, and then to kind of hype up the public over a cliff and then present a magic vaccine, which is really an injectable that contains nanoparticles and messes with your DNA. Well, it has to be kept at 70 below zero. What's that all about? I mean, so we're in quite a situation, I think, when we're looking at this, and we need sane voices, and we need to support those sane voices that are out there. People like RFK Jr., who came on this program and really laid out what he saw as basically a Bill Gates takeover of public policy, and which is, it is that it's that power politic that goes on so often from that level. And now what they've done is they've basically thrown all of this over to the kind of pharma forces. And so the pharma fascism is on overdrive, and they're trying to shut everybody up, because they're like, well, if we can shut it down and shut off any real investigation, we'll get away with this. And if we don't, then it's going to fail, and maybe many of us are going to jail. So, we really have to get on top of that. You have people like Catherine Austin Fitts really saying the media companies that are sponsoring this fraud should be completely indicted, the executives of those companies, for promoting this, and the political authorities, like Gavin Newsom. I mean, there's an amazing petition now in California to get rid of Gavin Newsom, and it has real force. They're going to get rid of him. And, you know, you have the little furor there, Garcetti in LA saying you can't walk in LA. You know, these are all petty tyrants, and there's no force of law in anything that a mayor or a governor says relating to this kind of policy. And I've checked with lawyers relentlessly. There is no force of law in these edicts that come from governors. You know, governors sign laws from legislatures that work them out. The governors do not have the kind of authorities that they're seizing. They'll only seize it as long as we put up with it. That's basically it. Okay, let's look at some of these motions. I've been telling you about the strange series of things that we see where they're showing Trump from behind in all of these pictures. And some of them I think are aggressive. They're coming through the mainstream media, and I have something like 20 examples on Twitter at this point. But here's another one that came out today. Trump strutted like a player, but also got played. And again, there we go with this. And it doesn't matter if you're New York Times, Huffington Post did it today. This is a very strange phenomenon. In my opinion, what they're trying to do is convey Trump as something of a target. And I think the imagery is disturbing. You know, some people might say, well, it's supposed to show him going away. Well, you know, you have all kinds of these. That's a different kind of going away. What I've found with the back of the headshots, and when I have a thread on Twitter, which is Trump's back, literally. And what you want to do is look at those because they go back beyond the election, which I think is very important for us to keep in mind. Whatever it is they're communicating, you know, they've also talked about this Manhattan prosecutor prosecuting Trump for financial crimes and all this. They're trying to amp up this situation where they just stamp out populism. And populism is really what supported Trump and took him over the top. And populism fundamentally means taking the power back from the corporations and having more of a sense of, you know, not the politicians ruling, but the public ruling. And, you know, this is not to say that Trump was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the forces behind Trump and the aspects of that deep state that were against him, if you really compare the two, the forces that were behind Trump were the America First forces. And those go all the way back to the 40s and 50s, and they're wrapped up with the National Association of Manufacturers. And they have a very Fortress America attitude. They're not about empire. They're about making America the big shot and having everybody kind of deal with them. So, you know, they weren't about going over and bombing the daylights out of Iraq for oil companies. And they weren't about going to Afghanistan to run the drug trade for 20 years in Afghanistan while any, you know, terrorist that was going by could pick off our guys quite easily. That group is the neocon group solidly, although they have been, and they still are, embedded in the Republican Party. They have been showing, you know, what happened basically is the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party became the neocons. So this is what we have to keep in mind as we go forward, that the neoliberal mindset is like the Obama, let's take over Libya and bomb the daylights out of them. Those aren't traditional Democrats by any stretch of the imagination. And what's calling itself left now has nothing to do with traditional leftists. It's way over, and that's why they try to get those traditional leftists, kind of like the Matt Taibbi, Roger Green, Glenn Greenwald, all this kind of thing, you know, really becomes a, well, those people don't really have a place in this party anymore. Where do they go? You know, the neoliberal party is basically a Republican version of the Democratic Party. And the Republican neocons are not even like the true measure of the traditional Republican Party, which was always a kind of hands-off other countries kind of a thing. So we really have to see how this develops as we go along. Everyone, you're watching this Dark Journalist special update on election 2020. I'm getting into a lot of different areas that don't only pertain to what's going on in the election today, but fundamentally what happened is the Electoral College came out with some votes and some results in at least 5 of those states, and it looks like 7 now, but in at least 5 of those states, they produced a Trump slate of electors in the disputed states. So when we're looking there at Arizona for sure, Georgia for sure, Pennsylvania for sure, Arizona for sure. And when we look at those states, and Nevada was the other one, when we look at those states, they added up to 53 electoral votes. And that's really the swing section of it, even without Michigan, where they kept the electors from coming in, which is really quite wild and phenomenal. We have Groovy Bean out there running the show, and we're probably not going to have any real time for questions, but if I can grab a couple off of the chat, I certainly will. It's great to have so many of you here. You know, today was supposed to be a very important, momentous day, and it was, but the way that the media is reporting it, they're just trying to crown this weird thing that they created, which was the Biden-Harris ticket. Too many unusual things. For example, if you look at the pollsters like Rasmussen, for example, or Trafalgar, who were very accurate in 2016, when they came around with their predictions this time around, they seem way off. And when they're going through the numbers, they're like, you know, there's no way these different places shook out the way that they did, because all of the changes took place in just those 5 states that were crucial, the swing states. And we don't see that pattern anywhere else in the country. So we have massive amounts of fraud testimony, and we have massive amounts of statisticians. You know, there was one statistician who gave this a quadrillion, 1 in quadrillion chance of happening the way that it did. So this is just the nature of the thing. And then the question is, what do? You work through the courts, you work through the legislatures. And so this is what they've been attempting to do, because in all of the different elections, if you go through them, and you can say that there were elections where there was voter fraud, for sure. Bush and Gore would be one. If you go back into the 60s and 70s, you'll find them, but they never had this kind of an impact. This is dramatic. This is like somebody's 10 points ahead and you put them 3 points down. It's a huge shift. The country has been tight in terms of its voting for a number of years, but the last time we had a one-term president was Bush 1, and that's 1992. So you're going to have to go back 28 years to find anything like this, because when you're an incumbent, you have the power of the presidency behind you. You've got the bully pulpit, you have the ability with fundraising and everything else. You're already there. It's very hard to unseat a sitting president unless it's like a Jimmy Carter situation where you have a national, like a hostage crisis. Or even with Bush, there were a number of things that were happening, but a lot of them were the disappointment around the Gulf War and then the tremendous economic downturn. And that's how they kind of rolled Clinton in there. But it was really, if you look to that 1992 election, it's fascinating, because a lot of the things that were brought up by Ross Perot about NAFTA, about GATT, about that huge sucking sound of jobs that would be going down south, it all turned out to be true. And all the things that the Clintons tried to sell us, just like they're trying to sell the vaccine and the, masks and all this nonsense now, all that stuff turned out not to be true. They just wanted a way to get China into the World Trade Organization. Previously, China had not been allowed because of their human rights violations. That is, they treated their workers like slaves, like trash. And instead of being punished for that kind of activity, they were rewarded when we took all of our companies over there. And that's one thing. That's one kind of greed that gets you there, that says we can get cheaper workers and lower our prices and do all this kind of stuff. And I guess, one of the things you could look at is say China got incredibly polluted, while our factories, since we went over there, we didn't have it so bad with pollution. China's already walking around with masks just from pollution. But one of the really, I think, bad things that happened, and you have to kind of go through a series of steps to make this take place. And the Clintons especially were corrupt in relation to the China situation. They had all kind of bundlers and handlers from campaign 1996 who all got prosecuted and were just running money left and right. This was, the Clinton giveaway, thinking we'll get China into the WTO. And so we've seen all those types of abuses, but in this situation with the Swalwell spy scandal and with the Biden laptop and with all of these other investigations, we're seeing too much influence from China over our national politics, and it's going to lead to a very bad situation where the Chinese are going to have more and more ambition, and they're going to have more and more reason to try to silence the people on the ground in America, the independent journalists and the outlets that are reporting on them, and they're going to be paying these high-level people in our government to shut it down. And this is where the bad glad-handing goes on. And so many, I was talking with Professor Peter Del Scott about this, so many of the Chinese, the people who were on that gravy train, who Professor Scott calls the middle managers. They don't have much of an ethic themselves. They just like picking up that money. And when Trump was in there, the gravy train was shut off pretty dramatically because Trump did a lot of pushback in the last 4 years on China. And if he got in for a second term, he would, deliver the TKO, basically. Instead, we're going back to the old way that was failing. And that's that's the state of things. That's where they're trying to push us to. That's why instinctively, even in addition to the voter fraud and everything else, Americans are instinctively pushing back on this. They want the transparency. They want to know who's behind this whole situation and what it is we're looking at really. And we don't want the kind of media fairy tale, and we don't want Saint Bill Gates coming in and pretending to be a doctor while they're cleaning up and injecting everyone with this RNA vaccine. This is, it really is setting up situations of division in the United States that will cause tremendous political problems. And they may have reasons for wanting a civil war, and we've discussed them here, for example, with the former HUD Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts, that they might think if they pose a civil war, that they can get out of some of the obligations that they have in relation to Social Security and in relation to Army pensions, treasuries, all kinds of things that they're on the hook for still, all the liabilities that are still in the country. So the indications are that they have plans to win regardless of the outcome. So one of the things I could do from just looking at this, if I were to just give us some advice as a nation, it would be completely to boot any of the lockdown politicians. There's a recall campaign against Newsom. I know they have an impeach campaign against Gretchen Whitmer. This is what needs to happen. And over again, I have to say the real draconian measures are in blue states. So although we don't like to get into red state, blue state on this show, and the right-left paradigm doesn't really make any sense. If you rolled out Bernie Sanders and he was for the Constitution, that's who we'd support. And, if Trump's for the Constitution and keeping things open, as he had been, he really, I think, pushed that idea, and the whole mask fascism and all that, he was very much against. And I think that he really, he became a bigger target for them because he didn't go along to the extent. He went along to a certain degree with Fauci and all this kind of stuff. But what we need is a real pushback against those governors. There's no question about it. And the petty tyrant mayors, all of them. Up here in Massachusetts, we have the Republican governor, Charlie Baker, who just, every other day is announcing all kinds of absurd stuff. If you're alone on a mountaintop, you have to wear a mask. It's just insane policy. But they have their reasons because they want to kind of puppy train us to this reality. And at the same time, they haven't moved the proper resources to where the age demographics told them in relation to any of the coronavirus data. So they just wanted to take over using that as an excuse. And they didn't even direct those resources. As a matter of fact, they're guilty of very criminal negligence in states like New York. And Andrew Cuomo supposedly, in his president-elect administration, Joe Biden was planning to have, Cuomo as his attorney general. I mean, can you see now what people are fighting to have the voter fraud thrown out? Can you imagine having that criminal as attorney general? It's pretty scary thought. One of the things I want to mention here, and I meant to get into it when we did the Friday night show, is about these strange pronouncements. We cover the UFO file very deeply on this program. It's a major part of all the things that we're talking about, either in relation to just the major secrecy around the government or the intense impact of the advanced technology that's been hidden, which we refer to as X technology on this program, not as a lark so much, but as something that we've shown over and over again, the steganography that's been used to get those programs through, and so that just the right people could be tracking them. But we've been seeing all kinds of things in relation to the UFO file. We've seen all kinds of false disclosure with the CIA pushing that whole thing. And of course, we know with the deep history of the UFO file that these are real, and this is important for us to be on top of it from a public level. But the whole TTSA, CIA clown show around the UFO disclosure subject, that's a big no-no. And so we've been pushing back on that and exposing it, and exposing characters like Lou Elizondo, who, by the way, worked for both Clapper and Brennan, this ex-CIA director, Drone King, and the former director of national intelligence who lied to Congress on multiple occasions. So that's where these people are coming in, and the Central Intelligence Agency has a great interest in this. But we've been seeing headlines like this: former Israeli space security chief says extraterrestrials exist and Trump knows about it. Now, you might think that headline would be from, some frivolous website. That's NBC News. And they're flat serious about it because, in fact, what would be equivalent to our NASA chief here came forward. He's now retired. And he said, there are UFOs. We are aware of them. We do have bases on Mars that are surveying them. They're here, and we are in communication with them. And, Trump wanted to actually give us public disclosure on this, but we decided, to go along because these aliens said, we don't want to be revealed yet. This is the story that they have out there. Okay, and I quote, former Israeli space security chief has sent eyebrows shooting heavenward by saying that Earthlings have been in contact with extraterrestrials from a galactic federation. Interestingly enough, I went into it, and Gigi Young did a really good video on this, and it is true and false disclosure. We have to really get this down, which is when we talk about something, we're talking about two things always. So when we talk about UFO disclosure, we're talking about the real UFO file and then fake CIA UFO disclosure, which they want to use for a threat, which they can get money funneled through Congress from a military program against UFOs and control the public. If you think the COVID opt is something, you ain't seen nothing yet, right? So that's one thing. We hear this line a lot about science, right? Well, science is guiding. Well, there's two types of science, okay? There's science where people are independently and collectively with organizations looking to get to the bottom of something. And then there's paid science, where the bottom line of a pharmaceutical company needs to get something passed regardless of its negative impact on the public. And there's always cases, let's think of the legal cases that Monsanto suffered so much that they collapsed. And the German company Bayer had to come forward and rescue them because they were in so many billions of dollars of trouble from their corrupt product that they were using. And the whole GMO thing just collapsed largely because the independent media blew them away on it. So you see, this gets into millions and millions of dollars. So when they're shutting down the independent media, someone like me who's come out and giving you these reports, and there have been so many, and they're right and left. I mean, I went over this, and I might do, like, before the year's over, just a huge list right down the line. But, if you have like a Whitney Webb on one side, and Dan Dix, for example, did Press for Truth out of Canada. They show no discernment. A lot of people might think, good, they're shutting down conservative voices, like conservatives. I'm not conservative, so that's good. Well, when they turn around, remember, if they go for them, they'll go for you too. So this is what we've seen, because anyone who doesn't agree with them, and their ideology is very strange. It's really pure transhumanism, and it's mixed with authoritarian streaks. Well, I don't think we even know the extent of what they're up to and what's behind this yet, but we're certainly getting close on this program. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is a live presentation update on the 2020 election, which is still in process. Today, they had the Electoral College voting, and in those disputed states, particularly the 5 I mentioned at the top of the program, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. I think I said Arizona twice. But the upshot is, when you look at Georgia and Pennsylvania and the amount of cases, there's something very special when we look at these different states. It is that Nevada provided their own electoral slate. So did Arizona, so did Pennsylvania, so did Georgia. And that slate went for Trump. Those electors decided to do that. They went to do it in Michigan. That was the other state, but they got blocked. As we were coming to broadcast tonight, they actually mentioned 7 states were now on Trump's side in terms of this alternate electors. We have to get that idea. People say, well, I thought Nevada went for Biden. Well, we have an alternate electoral slate of electors. That is what's provided in the Constitution. When there's a dispute, you get 2 slates of electors, and then it has to be worked out. So that's how it works with these. So that's really the big story from today, besides Attorney General William Barr resigning, which, as I said, if Trump were on his last legs and on his way out, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, because he'd just be out January 20th anyway. What's the point of letting yourself out before January? So it's very unusual. And I would say Barr, we've seen a lot of the corruption around the Biden cases, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, that they have held on to. And of course, the entire Crossfire hurricane, which got beefed up. And, we know there's a special counsel, Durham, now. But Barr did not give us that information during the election. That would have changed things in terms of the public perception, so that they never would have believed, and most of them can't even believe. They even have, I've been watching surveys where they have Democrats, and they have 10 or 15% of Democrats saying they don't believe that Biden won it in a fair fashion. They think there was voter fraud. 26% of independents, and then over 80% of Republicans. That's a lot of people against you starting. I mean, let's suppose they got their wish and they were able to cram through, this kind of, I don't know what you call it, Spock's brain Biden presidency. If they were able to get that through, you're starting out with a special counsel on you for crimes that you and your son committed, which they've been working on for 2 years. You'd be starting off with over half now of the country believing, even your own supporters, 10% of your own supporters believe that, and 26% of independents, that some kind of voter fraud was committed to get you in. These are pretty dramatic numbers. And so also with Biden's age and lack of mental, he's not very coherent, let's face it. I mean, it's just the elephant in the room. The guy's not very coherent. And it reminds me, if you go back and you look at the history of the Soviet Union, they had guys like this. They would roll them out. And I mentioned Chernenko and Yuri Andropov and some of these guys who were just controlled by the Politburo behind them, and this committee that would sort of, and they'd be the weird figurehead out there. And that's what they're trying to do. And in America, it's a very, very different system. This is not a system where communism can thrive. There's too much fundamental to our DNA that is about independence. And I think that's one thing that we give the world great inspiration on. America has that in its people. That's why we really are having a real deep look at this, and I think that people are saying we're not going to go for it. And you see it ramping up. There was and that's really regardless of which side of the political fence you fall on. You're more inclined, if you fall on the populism Trump fence, to be against it. But nonetheless, I don't think anybody wants, a big fraud election to be run. I mean, they can run it against your guy next time, and I'm sure that they did it to Bernie twice. So let's think about that. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our free newsletter to keep everyone in touch with us. We know there's been a tremendous clampdown on just expressing free ideas, free discussion. Some of the powerful discussions that we have here with Dr. Joseph Farrell and Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts, Gigi Young, and others. It creates ideas, the exchange of ideas. So much of the coronavirus and the lockdowns and social distancing, all this stuff has been about getting people to get away from each other so they don't interact because they're afraid of that. And, when you have Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum coming out and sort of pleasing that Davos crowd and saying, the fourth industrial revolution is going to include your biological signature. Just put the little swastika on and the little Hitler mustache already. Can this thing get any more Hitlerian? It's ridiculous. They want you to start wearing a COVID patch on your clothing to say, hey, I had a vaccine. If that isn't Jews in Germany in 1936, it's ridiculous. So I think that on that scale, we should develop the scale, which is what part of the Nazi regime are we in? Are we in 1935 or it seems like we're getting closer to 1939. And we know that this is a very tragic chapter in American history, and we always have the never again quote around this. So what's going to happen? Are we going to allow ourselves to be sort of rounded up and wear little stars that say you got your COVID vaccine? And so it certainly has to be looked at from that perspective. And I don't want to emphasize it in the fashion of, fear. It's just that it has to be addressed from the point of view of good, honest citizens pushing back on it on every level that they can. And certainly it's the kind of nonviolent resistance that will get us the best results in the grand scheme of things. My feeling is that these people have cooked up, and this goes a little bit deep, but I think that they've cooked up a whole thing with the Q reporting that they've done, that they paid so much attention in the mainstream media to Q because they wanted to use it as a straw man to shut down the alternative media, which was cutting into them and the program they wanted to do. And that's what we're looking at. So over and over again, when we see them doing that, we can see, well, they could create their own kind of Timothy McVeigh moment with someone who's supposed to be a Q supporter, just put all this Q paraphernalia and, make him guilty of something. And then you can go after all these people and you can pretend that the alternative media had something, was just about Q. And, Q showed up at the end of 2017 and it was some people posting on a board, whatever it is, however you want to look at it. The alternative media has been here since the 1960s, and I go back into the work of people like Mae Brussel, or when I talk to Professor Scott, he's been writing books since the late 60s on the Kennedy assassination. So this has nothing to do with these new things. So what they try to do, I think, in the mainstream media generally, is they're looking at this and they're saying, oh, we can get away with creating the UFO file and pretending that it just showed up and that, this is something that just happened. And, 2017, we'll have our New York Times story. And then we can get away with pretending that the alternative media is this dangerous thing full of dangerous ideas and dangerous people like me who are telling you that they're lying to you in relation to the numbers. Around the coronavirus, and they are using emergency powers to try to thwart the Constitution, which is something that they've been up to for a very long time. But now, they really seem to be zeroing in to make this happen. So therefore, they think that they can take something like the Q movement and try to rubber stamp anybody who's curious about anything with what they portray the Q thing as. And as I said, we've never followed Q on this program anyway. But even those people, you don't see them doing those types of things. So they're just trying to create this idea that these groups are dangerous and, approach them with caution and, they're all getting militant and all this stuff, or pretending that somehow being interested in, the truth about 9/11 makes you a proud boy. It doesn't. Some of the most intellectually powerful people on the planet and the bravest people on the planet have tried to sort through government misinformation and will continue to. This is why their op ultimately will fail. So we have to keep that in mind as we go along. All right, just to wrap up about the former Israeli space security chief, says extraterrestrial exists, right? So the Galactic Federation, which it turns out in the translation was a little bit different. It was more like Space Group. Has been waiting for humans to reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are, Haim Eshed said. That's the space security chief. The unidentified flying objects have asked not to publish that they are here. Humanity is not ready yet. The former head of Israel's Defense Ministry Space Directorate told Israel's Yediat Afronat newspaper. The interview in Hebrew ran on Friday and gained traction after parts were published in English by the Jerusalem Post. It didn't make it. I was one of the first people to publish it, actually, and a lot of people had no idea who this guy was, and I had to really go in there and figure it out also. But then the Jerusalem Post came up like a couple days later, and it was kind of amazing because everyone started to share the same exact story we put out on Saturday. The interesting key part for me, and I think that this goes hand in hand with all the strange things that we're seeing, because like I said, if you thought coronavirus was an op that really got control, wait till you see the alien op, because they're cooking up something very special, courtesy of the Central Intelligence Agency. Eshed said cooperation agreements had been signed between species, including an underground base in the depth of Mars where there are American astronauts and alien representatives. Now, we've heard about this for years in relation to Area 51. So they're taking that old story about aliens and humans working together at Area 51 and transferring it to Mars now. There's an agreement between the US government and the aliens. They signed a contract with us to do experiments here. This is something that we've heard about. It's all about this treaty that supposedly was signed by Eisenhower in the 50s. So this is stuff that's already been out there, but it's being repackaged. And the fact that somebody so senior in the Israeli Space Agency is saying it is really quite remarkable. Eshed added that President Donald Trump was aware of the extraterrestrials' existence and had been on the verge of revealing information, but was asked not to in order to prevent mass hysteria. The inclusion of Trump, more strange graphics with Trump. Look at that. Have you ever seen somebody's middle of the face disappear before? The fact that they mentioned Trump in the middle of all that, and that they've been toying around with the idea of Trump with the UFO file, and they did not expect to have to deal with Trump when he got in 2016. They were trying to roll out this whole TTSA, Elizondo, New York Times UFO op. But then Trump comes along with the Space Force, and this is really makes it a very, very different situation. So that was his attempt to get the UFO file back under presidential control. So there's a real factor there when we look at it. We have to keep this in mind, which is the UFO file sits there in the middle of all of these little political wranglings that we see going on, high and low. And you may notice when the lockdowns happened and in other situations, they talk about UFOs in a far more free manner, but it's always about the UFO threat. And over again, we're seeing this. Now, one quick thing before we go, it's great to have everyone here. Great to have Groovy Bean out there running the ship. And fantastic people are with us. Bernard Carrick, who you may recall, he's up on Twitter, historic and unparalleled. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico all had GOP electors cast votes for President Trump. That preserves the president's right to remedy fraud with his own electors. He's absolutely correct. And in his New York plain speak, he said exactly what I've been saying on this program, which is that election is ongoing because there are cases on the ground. There is Sidney Powell pressing the cases. There's Trump's Giuliani team. And we have that space now and these electors for if those cases go awry on the Democrat side and some of this fraud gets exposed. And trust me, there are people really working around the clock to get that information out. And if they do, some people are going to really be blown out of the water. So that's what we're watching for. So we're in the wheels of all this. And one day, Biden's up and the next day Trump is up and somebody's got a case and somebody else gets a case thrown out. That's the nature of what we're looking at. There is a time factor, but there's no time factor in the sense that we're going to blow the fraud away. And there's just too many people. When it's out in the open like this, it's very hard to get back in the bottle. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to be keeping a very close eye on the situation going forward. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is that when we mentioned the JFK National Security Action Memorandum, let me put this graphic together. That NSAM 57 is to be activated now by the Trump administration through the Pentagon, stripping the CIA of its covert ability to do covert ops with the support of the Department of Defense, which they can't do them without it. That particular National Security Action Memorandum being activated goes into effect now on January 5th. So we can see the timing with the Senate readout of the electoral votes and coronating the new president, which happens on January 20th. These things are all related, and this is what we really need to be watching for. I can't say we know how it's going to work out. We don't. But I will say that there's too many things in motion for us to think of it as, oh, well, they succeeded, they got Biden in, because any one of those cases, and there's a lot of them, and they would really blow the whole structure, not just one individual out of the water. This is why the deep state is so nervous, because their actions are getting undone. And if that gets undone, what happens to the corona? And by extension, what happens then to the UFO file op? All of these things start to look like they are under threat all of a sudden. And so they can't have that happen. That's why the media just shuts everything up. And that's why Twitter just, any story that came out about Hunter Biden during the election, boom, shut that down. Even if you're a major newspaper, we'll shut you down if we're Twitter. And so they don't want you discussing things. And even this program now is going to get a big flag that says, the election's already been decided, regardless of what dark journalist says. Fundamentally, that's what they're going to say. Eventually, they may remove this material altogether, but nonetheless, we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to allow them to make those types of moves. So it's been great having everyone here tonight. That's about it for everything I wanted to get across. There's a lot going on with Trump in 2020, Barr resigning those cases, Crossfire Hurricane, and the strange moves around the UFO file with the Israeli space chief, and then also Trump activating all these very interesting moves with the Defense Department and firing the defense secretary and activating JFK's National Security Action Memorandum. Unheard of. Nobody has ever been this active post-election, pre-inauguration. This is off the charts. Unfortunately, you have that weird stuff with the vaccine in between, which of course was rushed, and we're seeing already some very bad side effects come as a result of that. So we'll be watching these stories very, very closely for you. I'll do a couple of shout outs for everyone. Again, thank you, Groovy, for being out there. Rat Boy Genius, it's great to see you. Bruce Morgan, fantastic. Judy O, Joseph Fabry, it's great to see you, thank you. Bethany Green, Marco Zerpa, Buddha Yoga, Patrick Marchese, Plan B, Najat. Najat's out there. Najat's been all over this stuff. Jennifer Ann, John Anam, that's a good one. Josh Randall, it's great to see you out there, sir. Wow, fantastic. Tricky Vicky, now we're talking. We will see you all on Friday, and it's great to have everyone with us. I have to say that this particular, play out of the Electoral College, I think the scene of the day where the state police blocking the electors from coming into the State House under the order of Gretchen Whitmer, just more fascist activity that needs to be resisted by every constitution-loving citizen in America, regardless of what stripe you are or who you want politically. That type of activity should never be allowed. And neither should these lockdowns or slapping $1 million fines on gym owners. I mean, it all has to stop. And it stops with you and I talking the way that we are. And that's why I appreciate so many intelligent voices there in the ideas room. We will see you all next week. And some great super chatters tonight. I really appreciate your support on that. And if you want to subscribe to Dark Journalist, of course, go to darkjournalist.com and get behind the work that we do. It's very affordable, and we're doing some incredible things coming up for the new year that you're not going to want to miss, including some very exciting interviews that are coming up. And I mean, some really big stuff. So we're going to be very pleased to bring that to you, some incredible events and special things there. In any case, go and sign up for the newsletter, because that keeps us in touch with each other. Eurythmia is fun, and I would agree. Thank you. It's great to see you out there. Groovy, my hat's off to you. Excellent job. Michael Golpe, nice to see you out there, sir. Scarlet Fire, Shelby Cobra. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Classical music. Well, it's always good to see some new names, but it's always great to see such familiar faces too. We will see you all on Friday, and have a great evening. Today had some real interesting ups and downs. Bill Barr is no longer going to be Attorney General. That's a pretty interesting development, especially since, hey, it was supposed to be lame duck presidential administration. Why on earth would the Attorney General leave before January 20th? It begs the question, for sure. And the people who took over for him, very unusual too, one of them directly related to the Russian investigation. So we'll see how this all shakes out. And Gypsy Moon, great to see you. We'll see you all on Friday. Have a great one. And it says end broadcast, but after all, never really ends. Thanks, everyone. Bethany Green, Frank Castle, Mark Anthony. Outstanding. Two new guys are from Mass. I think I missed the first part of that. Vitamin Buyer, Ahmed, the man, the myth. Great to see you, sir. Brandy Mancini. We will see you all on Friday. Shelby Cobra. Have a great night, everyone. Groovy, again. Tip of the hat. Have a great one.